Before we get there, I want to talk about case study. So this is one from our relatively recent past. The situation was developing a minimum viable product. And this is not a code base that we developed ourselves. It was one that we have come in to work on. What I've noticed is that the sprints have been 100% utilized. So there's no real scheduling in the project plan for any time to refactor and to fix perhaps some of the bigger issues with the code. What it has meant is that effectively we can't pay down the technical debt if we don't have the scope to do so. That's probably the best way to put it. The second issue is that in this particular scenario is that it was a very complex architecture. So when I say complex, I'm not talking about like really difficult to understand. What I mean is that it has been developed in such a way that, yes, it does adhere to some of the patterns that are held up as good standard, but in doing so, it has departed from the principles of lean software. So wasn't simple, wasn't efficient, certainly not to develop in. Flexible, I'll give it that. It was flexible enough, but at the cost of carrying along the complexity and the inefficiency. And in terms of accessibility, it's mid-range. It wasn't terrible, but it certainly could have been simpler and easier to work in. Now, to give you an understanding and to circle back to really, I think what the purpose of this webinar was really all about, which is about avoiding a money pit with your code base. This is very closely tied to the concept of velocity. Velocity is simply a measure of how much work can your development team get through in any given sprint. So if you're getting through a lot of work, then you've got a high velocity and it's a very, very effective team. Or getting through the backlog of requirements versus actually, this feels like we are walking through quicksand. It feels like a tremendous amount of effort to do even simple things. And therefore you go quite slowly, that you've got a low velocity. So because the code in this particular case was so complex and so many files needed to be changed to do anything even simple, and this was affecting both the front end and the back end. It was kind of throughout the code. The velocity on the project was not great. It ultimately, I think, would have been, in hindsight, a better option to spend some time up front in doing some heavy refactoring of the code and the actual architecture, the way that the application was put together, in order to simplify it so that the rest of the project could have proceeded with significantly more velocity. My own personal opinion there, it is not always a message that necessarily people who are maintaining or who are attempting to get things done want to hear. And so I guess if I can leave you with a kernel of a thought from this webinar, it would be that when you think about the effort that might be involved in addressing some of the architectural or design pattern reasons that your dev team is so slow, think of it within the context of how much work is there left to do in this project and how much can I afford to have the dev team slow. Like on this project, I'd say it was about a factor of 4. So we were taking 400% of the amount of time that I expect would have been reasonable on a lean code base, 400%. Something to consider when you think about it in terms of just the economics of it. So that's the case study. What would I have done? I kind of already mentioned that. It would have been to refactor it heavily, kind of to make it a lean code base and then move forward with the dev.